Welcome to District Command Central, your go-to source for the latest news and updates on the Washington Commanders. Don't forget to hit that subscribe button and ring the bell so you never miss a play. If you're a Washington Commanders fan who has lived through the emotional roller coaster of the last couple of seasons, you already know that this team has not just been rebuilding on the field, but also rebuilding trust with its own fan base. And as the season winds down with only one game left on the schedule, it finally feels like the organization is stepping into an offseason that actually matters, one that could define the direction of the franchise for years to come, because this is not just about tweaking a few pieces here and there. This is about reshaping the identity of the roster, fixing long-standing problems, and proving that the front office truly understands where things went wrong and how to make them right. General Manager Adam Peters is at the center of all of this, and his job over the next few months will be one of the most challenging in the league because he is not inheriting a clean slate. He is inheriting a roster full of questions, contracts that need to be evaluated carefully, and several positions that have been a source of frustration for far too long. But in the middle of all that uncertainty, there's one small but incredibly significant piece of good news that could quietly change how this entire offseason unfolds. And that is the possibility that the Commanders have finally solved their kicker problem. It sounds almost ridiculous to say it out loud, because kicking should not be this complicated, but for Washington it has been a nightmare that just would not end, stretching across 2 seasons of missed opportunities, wasted money, and lost games that came down to points left on the field. And when you look back at how the Commanders handled the position, it is hard not to shake your head, because they try to brute force the solution by throwing money at it, handing Matt Gay the largest one-year fully guaranteed contract ever given to a kicker, hoping that financial commitment would bring stability, consistency, and confidence. But instead it turned into a disaster that symbolized everything that was wrong with their decision-making at the time. Gay simply did not deliver, finishing with a percentage that sat below 70. And when the pressure rose and the distance increased, the problems only became more obvious, as he connected on just 4 of his 9 attempts for beyond 50 yards. And those misses were not just numbers on a stat sheet. They were momentum killers, confidence crushers, and moments that made fans hold their breath every time the kicking unit came onto the field. And eventually the front office had no choice but to admit defeat, cutting ties with Gay in November and accepting that the plan had failed. That is where Jake Moody enters the story. And if you had told most fans earlier in the season that the solution would come from plucking a kicker off another team's practice squad, there would have been plenty of skepticism, especially considering Moody's own complicated history in the league as a former third-round pick who carried the weight of expectations and struggled to consistently meet them. But football has a funny way of humbling people and offering second chances, and sometimes all a player needs is the right environment, the right timing, and the freedom to just do his job without the constant noise. The irony of Moody's arrival in Washington is impossible to ignore, because this is the same kicker who broke Commanders' hearts earlier in the season with a walk-off field goal while playing for the Chicago Bears, a moment that felt cruel at the time, but now almost reads like foreshadowing, as Adam Peters decided to bring him in, reunite with a familiar face from his past connections, and give him an opportunity that could redefine his career. And from the very first kick, it became clear that this was not the same shaky player many remembered. Since joining the Commanders, Moody has been nothing short of automatic, hitting every field goal attempt, going 9 for 9, and showing range, confidence, and composure that have been missing at the position for years, including drilling a kick from 51 yards out, a distance that had become a psychological barrier under the previous regime. And while he did miss one extra point, that moment came with an explanation that actually inspired more confidence than concern as the snap came. In with the laces facing him, one of the cardinal sins for a holder, and even then, the miss felt more like a fluke than a trend. What stands out the most is not just the makes themselves, but the timing of them, because Moody has delivered in high-pressure situations, the kinds of moments where games hang in the balance and the weight of the season rests on a single swing of a leg. And instead of looking rattled, he has looked calm, focused, and decisive, traits that matter immensely for a team try to establish a winning culture. Because knowing you can trust your kicker changes how coaches call games, how players approach late drives, and how the entire sideline feels when points are on the line. As the Commanders head into the season finale against the Philadelphia Eagles, there's a quiet sense of optimism that did not exist a few weeks ago. Because even though this game will not magically erase the struggles of the year, it represents another opportunity for Moody to cement himself as the long-term answer. And if he continues on this path, Washington will enter the offseason with one less glaring hole to fill, which may not sound glamorous, but in the NFL, stability at any position is a gift. Looking ahead, the importance of this cannot be overstated, because the Commanders are expected to have plenty of salary cap space, and how they choose to spend it will determine whether this rebuild accelerates or stalls, and not having to allocate resources, attention, and mental energy to the kicker position allows Adam Peters to focus on bigger picture needs, from strengthening the roster to adding depth and finding cornerstone players who can carry this franchise forward. And if Moody truly is the answer, then this late season roster move may go down as one of the quiet turning points of the year. For a fan base that has endured disappointment after disappointment, sometimes progress does not arrive with fireworks or headlines. Sometimes it arrives with consistency, with a kicker jogging onto the field and doing his job without drama. And if Jake Moody continues to be that guy, then the Commanders may finally be able to close the book on one of the most frustrating chapters of their recent history and step into the offseason with a little more confidence, a little more clarity, and a little more belief that this team is at long last moving in the right direction. If you're enjoying the coverage, make sure to smash that like button and drop a comment with your thoughts on the Commanders' latest moves. We want to hear from you. When people around the league start whispering at the same time, you can almost feel that something big is about to explode, and that is exactly the sensation surrounding the San Francisco 49ers and the future of Brandon Aiyuk, because the noise coming from behind the scenes suggests that the front office may have finally opened the door to a blockbuster scenario that nobody truly expected to become this real. Sources close to the situation keep hinting that a monster package has been discussed, evaluated, reworked, and possibly accepted in principle, and the destination that keeps coming up again and again is the Washington Commanders, a franchise eager to change its narrative and inject star power into its offense. This is not being treated as a casual phone call or a courtesy check-in, but rather as a deep, strategic conversation that has stretched over time, with both sides understanding the weight of moving a player of Aiyuk's caliber, a receiver who has grown into a central figure of the 49ers' identity and an explosive weapon capable of tilting the field in a matter of seconds. From the perspective of San Francisco, the rumor carries a complex mix of pragmatism and ambition, because while Brandon Aiyuk has become one of the most dynamic pieces in their offensive puzzle, the franchise also faces the reality of managing future resources, contracts, and long-term roster balance. Insiders suggest that the offer placed on the table by Washington is the kind of proposal that forces even the most loyal organizations to pause and listen, a package so substantial that it reframes the conversation from emotional attachment to cold strategic opportunity. The idea circulating is that the 49ers front office looked at what was being proposed and realized that it could potentially reshape multiple areas of the roster rather than focusing everything on a single star. And that realization is what supposedly pushed them from a firm no toward a more open and flexible stance. In these moments, decisions are rarely about talent alone, but about windows of contention, financial flexibility, and the belief that smart management can replace individual brilliance with collective strength. On the other side of the equation, the Washington Commanders appear hungry, aggressive, and determined to make a statement that resonates throughout the league, because acquiring Brandon Aiyuk would signal a new era of boldness and ambition. People familiar with the Commanders' internal discussions describe a front office that sees Aiyuk not just as another receiver, but as a cornerstone around which an offense can be built, a player who demands defensive attention and creates opportunities for everyone else on the field. The belief is that Washington views this move as transformative, the kind of acquisition that changes how opponents prepare and how fans perceive the franchise, and that belief is what has fueled their willingness to put together a package being described as massive, aggressive, and impossible to ignore. The Commanders understand that players like Aiyuk rarely become available, especially ones entering their prime with proven production and the versatility to line up anywhere. And that urgency has driven them to push harder than most teams would dare. As the rumor continues to gain traction, the league itself seems to be leaning in because trades of this magnitude tend to ripple far beyond the two teams directly involved. Executives, agents, and analysts are all quietly speculating about what this could mean for the market value of elite wide receivers and how it might influence future negotiations across the board. There's a growing sense that if the 49ers truly move forward with this deal, it will represent a philosophical shift, a sign that even contenders are willing to make shocking moves if the return aligns with their broader vision. At the same time, the uncertainty adds to the drama, because until pen meets paper, everything exists in that tense space between possibility and reality, where leaks, half-truths, and strategic silence dominate the narrative. That tension is exactly what makes this story feel alive, because every new whisper seems to push the situation one step closer to a definitive outcome. For Brandon Aiyuk himself, this moment represents a crossroads filled with both opportunity and unpredictability, because being linked so strongly to the Commanders suggests that his name is no longer untouchable in San Francisco. Those close to the player believe he understands the business side of the league and recognizes that interest of this magnitude is a reflection of his value and impact, not a dismissal of his contributions. The possibility of a fresh start, a new system, and a franchise eager to build around him carries its own allure, even as the idea of leaving a contender brings understandable hesitation. As fans wait and debate, the prevailing feeling is that something significant is brewing beneath the surface, and that the silence from official channels only amplifies the sense that the pieces are quietly being lined up. Whether this rumor becomes reality or fades into one of those legendary almost trades, it has already captured attention and stirred emotions, because moves like this challenge assumptions and remind everyone that in the National Football League, certainty is always temporary and the next shock is never as far away as it seems. Thanks for tuning into District Command Central. Make sure to subscribe and follow us for all the Commanders news you need. Until next time, keep the faith and hail to the Commanders.